warm welcome to the next edition of Business for Humanity, Reinventing Capitalism. And it's a fantastic pleasure today to be talking about well-being economy with one of the godfathers of ecological economics, Robert Costanza. And we are very, very excited to be hearing the latest and greatest from Robert and his work. But of course, as usual, we want to sink into this call by getting a little bit closer to everybody here who's joining us. So please join us for a 4 or 5 word check-in. Where are you coming from today? What is your main role, or what role are you taking up on this call? And the question of today is, what is your favorite idea? What have you heard recently or picked up from someone or even experienced yourself in terms of reducing our environmental footprint? So any good ideas that you have that we personally could take some action to help reducing degradation of natural resources. And whilst everybody's getting onto the chat and introducing themselves, as always, let me briefly introduce our team. As always, there's Antoinette from the University of St. Gallen, the researcher, Kees coming from the Netherlands, our activist, Silvio, the voice of the future, representing all the students and especially the economics students. I will take the role of the business guy as usual. And of course, a warm welcome to all of you as the valiant explorers with us on this mission. And again, what is the goal of our mission? What's the objectives? It's to create a resource and to engage in a comparative analysis of all the alternative, or the most important alternative paradigms and approaches to economics out there that are seeking to make our economic system and capitalism better, or even to change it completely. And the way we want to do this is to look at it in a credible and critical and educational fashion, but also be inspiring and action-oriented. And again, a warm welcome to all the students and the increasing number of university professors and educators who are joining the series. And on that note, I would also like to thank you for all the feedback and the suggestions, and then invite you to look at our updated website. So we have taken on board the feedback from many of you who said it's too difficult. There's a lot of information, but it's hard to find and hard to get through. So we have started to change the design of the website so that you can get easy access to what's the session about, who are we interviewing, what is the main, always one book or one essay that we're suggesting as pre-reading, what's the summary of that book, and then what's our preliminary analysis of the values, the institutions, and the transformational change theory that the authors are embracing. You will find that in a succinct and hopefully now very easily accessible format. Within normally 7 to 14 days, you will find all the recordings on that webpage. And of course, for those who are interested to dive deeper, you will have lots of materials and resources and books at the bottom of the page. So if you are intending to go further, you can also find some help and suggestions there. And of course, if there are resources shared by the community, and again, invitation to do so on the chat, we will also feature them on the website. How is our session today going to look like? As always, we're going to start with the presentation. Kees is going to introduce Robert very, very shortly. We're going to have Antoinette leading the exploratory Q&A. And in the second part, I will introduce the meta-inquiry and finally the plenary for everybody to engage, share their ideas and takeaways, and of course to vote. And usual, before we go into the main presentation, the warm-up question. So here's the challenge for everybody on the chat. Please tell us, what are ecosystem, or formerly known as environmental services? Ecosystem services, environmental services. This is going to be one of the core concepts that Bob is going to tell us about. So please, if you know anything about this, share with us what you think this is all about and what the definition is. Let's give it a few seconds, because I have to admit, I had never heard about ecosystem services before. And I must admit, in hindsight, this is quite stunning, having done my economic studies, my MBA and everything. And still, we have not been exposed to any degree, as Kees is always saying, to heterodox economics, or let alone to the marriage of economy and ecology, which is really embodied in ecosystem services. I think on the chat you're as puzzled as I was, so let's hand over to Antoinette for a brief definition.
Ecosystems at the core seek to explain the value of nature from an anthropocentric perspective. What services do we derive from nature for our well-being? In the broadest version, 4 such services are distinguished. First, provisioning, for instance, water. Second, regulating, for instance, the climate. Third, cultural, for instance, through inspiration. And probably most important, fourth, life-supporting, for instance, by maintaining biodiversity. In order to incorporate the value of nature into our conventional economic systems, instruments such as payment for ecosystem services have been developed. We will hear more about this later.
Wonderful. And I think it's very interesting here to see how payment for ecosystem services can become part of policy, where either we are paying people to maintain ecosystem services, for example, keeping a field with wild growth and biodiversity and keeping it intact, so to speak, or we're making people pay for destroying ecosystem services. And it becomes really an instrument to translate the value that nature or natural capital can provide to human beings into money, which of course also provides, it gets us into some trouble potentially. But with that, and without any further ado, let me hand over to Kees to introduce Robert. Kees, over to you.
Well, I feel really honored to introduce Mr. Costanza because I don't want to feel you to make you feel uneasy, Robert, but it feels like we have economic royalty in our midst this afternoon. Because your CV on ecological economics and well-being economics is just crazy. And I would like, before giving the floor to you, I would like to emphasize for all the people that join us the 2 foundational elements that you yourself and your fellow ecological economists have introduced to the economic field of research, which first and foremost is the acknowledgement that economics or the economy is an embedded thing, right? So the economy is by definition embedded in society, and society is by definition embedded in the biosphere, which is quite foundational in relationship to the fact that many mainstream economics is still treating nature as a resource instead of the other way around. And another, well-being is the ultimate end of economics and the focus of economics activities. And those 2 have changed the economic field foundational and fundamental. And I know that a lot of people, new economic thinkers that are trying to make sense out of the situations that we are in, with all the ecological disaster taking place, people like Kate Raworth and Catherine Trebek and John Fullerton, they are very much influenced by you and your fellow economists. So without any other commentary, I would like to give you the floor to share your important work with us. And for all the people that will participate later, if you have any questions, please leave them in the chat so we can share them afterwards with Mr. Costanza. Robert, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Kees, for that wonderful introduction. And I think I will go ahead and share my screen. You can see me for a little bit. Hi. I should say that my background was not really economics. My PhD was in systems ecology. So I started out looking at the whole system, and I think that influenced how I approach and how I think we all should be approaching economics and the management of our whole biosphere. And I think that's what's really necessary these days. Oops, let me go back here. Okay. And I hope you can all see that, right? how do we change our economic paradigm? And I think part of the problem is that we are addicted to the current system, and we need to do something quite different in order to overcome that addiction. Let's see. There we go. Well, I'm sure you all know that we live now in what's been called the Anthropocene. It's a full world of humans and their artifacts because of the magnitude of the human influence on our biosphere. And I think that means that business as usual is really no longer an option. If we really want to create a sustainable and desirable Anthropocene, we need to think and act quite differently. And I think we need to take this opportunity to build an economy and society that are based on a different goal, on the goal of sustainable well-being of humans and the rest of nature, and recognizing that interdependence, that we're a part of the rest of nature, and we're rather than the single-minded pursuit of GDP growth, which has been dominating our policies for decades now. And to do that, to achieve the sustainable well-being, I think we need to integrate these three elements of having an adequate vision, first of all, of how the world is, our scientific understanding, and a more integrated vision of that world. So we're learning a lot about how the Earth system functions, but we're also learning a lot about how human psychology functions, the whole field of positive psychology. What actually does contribute to humans' well-being? What contributes to the well-being of the rest of nature? And how does that complicated system work? But we also need a vision of how we would like the world to be. What's our vision for the future? What kind of world are we trying to create? And I think that's something that I think is going to be essential in order to overcome the addiction to the current system. We also need analytical tools that are consistent with this approach, and I think that's going to require more systems thinking and modeling, looking at the whole system rather than just the economy or just the biosphere, and how they're interconnected. And I think we're going to need some implementation strategies, like new institutions to manage the commons and societal therapy, as I'll talk about. So we know that the Earth is a complex adaptive system. It's nonlinear. It's got thresholds and tipping points. I won't spend too much time on any of this, since I'm sure your audience is probably well aware of many of the underlying scientific ideas here, but we're close to potential thresholds. For example, we know that there are planetary boundaries, and you've probably seen some version of this paper, and there have been several versions, that there are fundamental ecological constraints in these 9 planetary boundaries, and where is the safe operating space for humanity, to continue within the safe operating boundaries. And there's been this is probably the most recent version of that paper, which argues that we're already beyond 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries that have been identified, including, of course, climate change, land system change, biosphere integrity and biodiversity loss, novel entities has entered recently, and biogeochemical flows. And so we know that we're close to a major tipping point where we could fall into what Will Stephan has called a hothouse Earth, it'll be very difficult to get out of that situation. So how do we make that transition to a stabilized Earth with an Earth system stewardship? Unfortunately, that's not the movie that a lot of people are lining up to go see. They're willing to believe a reassuring lie that there's not a problem, that technology will save us, that growth can continue, and all we have to do is figure out how to do it a little more technologically savvy. But I think the problem is that we need a third movie. We need a vision and a narrative of what a sustainable and desirable economy in society, in the rest of nature. As Keith mentioned, that recognition, I think, is fundamental, that we're all on this planet together. The economy is not a separate thing from society or the rest of the environment. So we need to stay within planetary boundaries, but we also need to create the elements of well-being and quality of life for everyone on Earth. We need to be in the safe and just donut, as Kate Raworth has said. And part of that changing vision, I think, also is recognizing and how an economy could function in that sort of situation. And the field of ecological economics has been around for a while. It's an attempt to create a more transdisciplinary and pluralistic approach that recognizes that embeddedness and is structured around these three integrated questions or goals. How do we create an ecologically sustainable scale or magnitude, or how do we stay within planetary boundaries, basically? How do we have a socially fair distribution of wealth and resources, both within the current generation of people, but also between current and future generations, and between humans and other species? So this whole issue of equity and fairness, I think, is key. And finally, an economically efficient allocation of resources. How do we use things efficiently, but going well beyond the market allocation system, which certainly does not cover everything, does not cover our natural and social capital in particular. So how do we bring everything into that system and do it efficiently? Ecological economics is not the only version of these sorts of ideas. I think it's been around perhaps maybe a bit longer than some of the other ones, but the well-being economy is another way of talking about it. The circular bioeconomy, the regenerative economy. The Chinese are pursuing something called ecological civilization, the donut economy of Kate Raworth, Herman Daly's steady state economy. I like the Swedish word lagom. I'm not sure if you guys have ever heard that one, but that means just enough. Everybody has, it's not sacrifice, but it's not overconsumption. How do we create an economy where everyone has enough? Anyway, and these are not the only versions. I think the problem going forward is how do we build a broader consensus? How do we recognize that all of these ideas are headed in the same direction? But to take one step back, let's look at the empty world, the old vision of the economy that I think is still driving a lot of our policy decisions and thinking with, the primary factors of production: land, labor, and capital. Land is kind of grayed out because there's an assumption of almost perfect substitutability between these factors. You don't really need natural resources. You just need more capital and labor to build, to create more goods and services, marketed goods and services, which is what GDP measures, which are then either consumed or reinvested to build more capital and labor for the next time period. And the underlying assumptions and premises in this model is more is always better. GDP is a good proxy for national welfare. This economy can grow forever. There's nothing in this vision that limits the growth of GDP forever. Poverty is best solved with more growth, therefore, and nature is kind of a sideshow because you don't really need nature to produce these goods and services. And private property is always best because you're talking about marketed goods and services, which are best handled if they're private property. And also that welfare is mainly a function of how much we're consuming, our income, our standard of living. But that's not the appropriate model going forward. In the full world, in the Anthropocene, we have to recognize that we live in a materially closed Earth system, that all four of these types of capital are all required in a more balanced way to produce not only conventional GDP, but well-being more broadly conceived. And so in addition to built capital and human capital, not just labor, but everything about individuals, there's also social capital, all of our culture, our networks, our governments, all of those things are absolutely essential, of course, once you think about it. And finally, our natural capital, everything else in the world that we didn't have to produce, the free gifts of nature. That property rights need to be much more complex and nuanced in this system. Oops. So we need to have a larger space for common property resources and different kinds of institutions to manage that. And finally, and most importantly, perhaps, that this conception of well-being has to be much broader than simply consumption. That in fact, many of the things that are necessary for well-being are usually left out of conventional economic thinking. One way of thinking about that is that we need to basically satisfy this list of human needs, and there have been several versions of these lists, but they go well beyond consumption and subsistence, and include security, affection, understanding, participation in decision making, having leisure activity, spirituality, creativity, etc. There's been a lot of research on subjective well-being, asking people how well they think they're doing. And that varies a bit based on how these basic needs are being fulfilled. But what we can do from a policy perspective really is to create the opportunities for people to meet those needs, to feel this sense of subjective well-being by how we arrange our built, our human, our social, our natural capital, and how we use our time. So this much more nuanced view of what contributes to well-being and how to measure it and how to improve it. And of course, one of the major contributors that had been ignored, I think, is the contributions of natural ecosystems to this range of well-being issues or areas. They've been defined as the benefits that humans derive from functioning ecosystems. This is from the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, and you can see that they categorize this list of services into these 4 categories of provisioning, regulating, cultural, and supporting services, and how they connect with all the various aspects of human well-being that I mentioned before. One thing that's missing, I think, in this diagram is the interaction with the other 3 types of capital. So really, to understand ecosystem services, you've got to understand how they interact with social built human capital and how they contribute to sustainable human well-being. And there's been a lot of interest and research on this area of ecosystem services. There's the IPBES you've probably heard about, which is kind of the IPCC equivalent for ecosystems and ecosystem services. I found out recently that I won the Blue Planet Prize along with the IPBES. So the recognition that this idea of ecosystem services is really becoming much more important and topical. There's the Ecosystem Services Partnership is another global group. And if you'd like to know more about who's doing what in this area, you can take a look at their website. The academic interest and research interest in this field has been growing dramatically. And so this is just a plot of the number of papers published on the topic of ecosystem services from Scopus, well over 6,000 papers a year, and over 57,000 papers have been published on this topic. So quite a literature has accumulated. The most highly cited of those is this one we did back in 1997, which was an initial estimate of an estimate with a capital E of the value of 17 different ecosystem services across 16 different biomes. And we came up with an estimate that was significantly larger than global GDP at the time. So one thing we didn't control was what they put on the cover. They said pricing the planet, and what we meant really was more like valuing the planet, recognizing that most of these services are not traded in markets and probably shouldn't be traded in markets, but are nevertheless valuable in the sense of contributing to human well-being, and that we could estimate that contribution and express it in monetary units. Since then, we've tried to estimate the changes in those services over time. We did an update in 2014 and looked at the changes between 1997 and 2011 based on land use change and changes in our understanding from all those additional thousands of papers that had been published, and estimated that we're losing about $20 trillion a year in those services due to that land use change. And we also tried to look into the future under different scenarios. If we continue with business as usual, we will see continued losses in those services. We could arrest those losses with the appropriate policies, or we could do a great transition. We could really make the changes necessary to restore and manage ecosystems in a way that improves their ecosystem services and human well-being in general. Of course, the problem is that we are stuck on this idea of GDP as a major policy goal. And it was never designed for that purpose. As the architects of GDP clearly stated, you should really think about what your goals for growth should specify of what and for what. So if our goal is simply to maximize and increase the rate of production and consumption of marketed goods and services, then we're going to miss a lot of things that are important to human well-being. And so I think it's time to leave GDP, at least as our primary goal, behind and move to broader definitions of well-being. There have been lots of efforts to move in that direction over time. This is just a small subset of some of the alternatives that have been suggested. I'll talk a little bit more about the genuine progress indicator, which is among a group that tries to modify GDP to get a better, more comprehensive answer. There's a whole range of ones that basically survey people and ask them what their life satisfaction has been. And then there's a range of indicators that take a group of different things and aggregate them together to say how life is getting better. The Human Development Index is the first and probably most popular of those. The OECD Better Life Index is a more recent one that's really interesting. But I'll just spend a little bit of time talking about the GPI. But we're working now on trying to build a broader consensus here. And one of the things that we looked at was, well, how many of these indicators are there actually? And we had a class working on this, and they came up with actually it's more than 400 alternative indicators that have been proposed in various ways. And so that's part of the problem, because there's really what we really need is some consensus, and a lot of these indicators are really saying the same thing in different language, not really communicating with each other. So we're working now on how to build that broader consensus, how to recognize how similar they all really are. But just to give you one example, the genuine progress indicator starts with personal consumption, a major component of GDP, but then it weights it by income distribution to get at the fairness issue and the fact that income and welfare are not the same thing. It adds a few things that are left out, like household labor and volunteer work, and then it subtracts a bunch of things that shouldn't be counted as positive: the cost of crime, the cost of the cost of air and water pollution. So covering the full range of these 4 different types of capital that I mentioned. And it's denominated in dollar terms, so you can compare it directly with GDP per capita. And we've done that as a global estimate, and find that in many countries and overall, even though GDP per capita was going up, GPI, which tracked it for a while in the post-World War II period, but after about 1980 or so, it started to gradually decline because of increasing inequality, increasing environmental damage largely. So now we are addicted to this indicator because it's going up. We're following this lead, but in fact, our genuine progress, when you take into account some of the major negative side effects of that growth, is really not improving at all. We've gone from a period of economic growth to a period of uneconomic growth. So how do we change that? How do we get back into thinking and creating an economy that really works for everyone and for the planet that supports us? And so to do that, I think we have to break our addiction to this growth at all costs paradigm, to fossil fuels, to overconsumption, and to inequality. And I think of it as an addiction because there's a lot of positive feedback loops that keep us in this operating in this system, even though we recognize that it's not the direction that I think, as I'll show, most people want to go. A key step in this therapy is building this shared vision of a more sustainable and desirable future that focuses on the well-being of all humans and the rest of nature. So one way we approached this was teaming up with some psychologists, Tim Kasser and Paul Atkins, and asking, well, what works at the individual scale to overcome addictions, and can we apply that at the societal scale? And it turns out that there's one therapy that seems to be that works quite well, called motivational interviewing, where instead of confronting addicts with the problem directly, which usually is counterproductive and gets this a denial kind of response, they start by engaging addicts in a positive discussion of their goals, their motives, their futures, what kind of life do they want, and that then can motivate the changes, the difficult changes that are necessary to overcome the addiction. So the obvious analogy at the societal scale is, well, how do we build this shared vision of the kind of world that we all want? The UN SDGs are certainly a major step in the right direction in that regard. So it's the first time in human history, I think, that all countries in the world have really agreed on a set of goals that are much broader than simply economic growth, even though that one's still in there. But I think it encompasses many of the things that I think most people would agree would contribute to a sustainable and desirable kind of future. But we also have to recognize that those goals are not independent. They're not 17 independent things. They all contribute in different ways to the sub-goals I mentioned of sustainable scale, fair distribution, efficient allocation, and to the overarching goal of a prosperous, high quality of life, a well-being, and a sustainable and inclusive well-being world. How do we actually make a difference then? How do we build this shared vision? Well, one way of looking at the future and uncertainty about the future that's been used quite a lot is scenario planning. How do we map out alternative futures and then get people to think about which of those futures are preferable? These are the scenarios that have been worked on by the Great Transition Initiative for quite a while now, the sort of conventional market forces, business as usual scenario, the kind of archetypical future scenarios, the policy reform, more planning in government, with better equity, and the Great Transition. We're all in this together, governance at many levels, stewardship and sharing. I think the SDGs fit nicely into that Great Transition scenario. So how do we build that scenario there, though? How do we get people to think about what those worlds could look like, what their life could be like in those different worlds, and which ones are preferable to build this shared vision to help motivate the kinds of changes that we need going forward. We did a survey in Australia and asked people that question. We basically said, here are 4 alternative futures. We changed the terminology a bit, but they're very similar to the Great Transition scenarios. And we asked them to read about these, and to consider them and say which ones would they prefer. And we got answers that look something like this. We asked them to rank them, and 72% ranked either the community well-being scenario, the sustainable scenario, if you will, number 1 or number 2. But we also asked them, where they thought the country was headed. And they, in that case, they said most of them thought that they were headed towards the free enterprise, the business as usual world. So, and you see that in a lot of these kinds of surveys, that people want a kind of world that's more consistent with the SDGs, but they are not seeing progress in that direction. They're seeing their societies headed in the opposite direction. And that tension, I think, is perhaps what we need to drive the changes at the ground level. This is from another set of surveys that I came across recently, where they asked people just among these 2 scenarios of the sort of business as usual scenario versus the sustainable scenario, which one was more desirable on a scale of 1 to 6. And you can see that in almost all countries, in all countries, the sustainable scenario was thought to be much more desirable than the business as usual scenario, with some interesting differences as well. Italy, for example, much more sort of the highest desirability of the sustainable scenario and the lowest desirability of the business as usual scenario, compared to Nigeria, where the difference is not quite as big. But I think that the message is clear that we need to build this vision, not only among the policy community and the SDGs, but I think among the general public, to then motivate and change the way society is working. And there are some efforts in that direction. How do we build the movement? It's going to take, I think, a critical mass of people who share this vision in order to move in that direction. And I'm not sure if you've heard of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and if not, you should take a look at their website and get involved. They're trying to bring together all of the many hundreds of groups really around the world that are all moving in the same direction, but are not really communicating with each other. So we need to build this broad alliance. There's a really good TED talk by Nicola Sturgeon, the former First Minister of Scotland, on the well-being economy. And there's a group of governments that have started a well-being economy governments initiative, including Scotland, Wales, Iceland, Finland, New Zealand, and Canada. And if you want to learn more about We All, take a look at their website, thewellbeingeconomy.org, and begin. It's one effort, I think, to build this movement of movements, I think, which will be necessary to move forward. And there's also, I think, some interesting literature on whether this is all feasible. And that's one of the first objections that come up. Well, this is all nice, but this could never happen because it's totally infeasible. And these three books, I think, give the lie to that. There's Peter Victor's Managing Without Growth. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Tim Jackson's Prosperity Without Growth. And Andrew Sims' Cancel the Apocalypse, where he goes into a list of all of the things that are going on right now that fit into this sustainable scenario, but that are not scaled and that are not all happening in the same place. Peter Victor created a computer model of the Canadian economy and asked the question, could you have a no-growth disaster? And obviously, if you just shut off GDP, overnight and that's all you did, then yes, that would not be a good thing. But you could also have a better low or no growth, a positive economy that met all the goals that I'm talking about with the appropriate set of policies in place. And one way of thinking about those policies that he recommended is to think about as the 12-step program. What do we need to change to get to this world? And he suggested we needed new meanings and measures of success. So we need alternatives to GDP. We need to measure GPI or something better to measure well-being. We need limits on material, energy, waste, and land use. We need to stay within planetary boundaries. We need more meaningful prices. We need to recognize that the current market prices are leaving out important externalities. The market's not really telling us the truth about anything that we buy. So we need to incorporate those externalities into the market pricing system. We need more durable, repairable products for obvious reasons. If we're not concerned about just maximizing turnover and we're concerned about maximizing well-being, then we want products that actually last. Fewer status goods, more community-oriented goods and services, more informative advertising. So advertising should not be aimed at changing our preferences to buy more things that we don't really need, but should just tell us what the product does. Better screening of technology. Technology is a good servant, but a poor master. So we shouldn't just go wherever technology leads. We should try to encourage the technology that helps us achieve our sustainable well-being goals. More efficient capital stock for the same reason as more efficient consumer items. More local, less global, but mainly for the purpose of building local communities and building social capital at the local level. We shouldn't import and export things that we don't need to be imported and exported. We should concentrate more on the local. Reduced inequality for obvious reasons. This is an important contributor to poor social capital. We have too much inequality, so we need to reduce that to build social capital and to improve well-being. Less work, more leisure. So having better work-life balance, having fewer people that overwork and fewer people that are underworked. So how do we balance that out? And finally, education for life and not just work. So we shouldn't be educating people simply to get a job to make money to buy things they don't really need, but to understand their own well-being and how to improve their own well-being in a much broader conceptual sense. So I'll end with just a plug for three recent books that go into a lot more detail in all of this, including this last one that does that, but also this one that talks about moving toward a more integrated science of well-being. How do we understand well-being at the individual, the community, the national, and the global scale across both the economy, society, and the rest of nature? And I'll end it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert. Wonderful. Thank you that you gave us this very interesting talk. And I would like to open the question section now. And as usual, we are opening it with our inquiry framework. So we're going to look at how desirable is the model you just presented to us, how feasible is it, and would people choose it? Would they incur the burdens and new responsibilities to do so? And to make it more concrete, we will look at your ideals, values, so inquiring into how nature can be brought together with fairness or dignity. We will try to understand the institutions of the well-being economics, which institution will enable sustainability of natural, human, social, and built capital. And finally, we want to learn how well-being economics seeks to bring the change into the world. And here we will look, for instance, certainly at the Well-being Alliance you were just showing to us. But without further ado, what I would like to ask is to start with the next leader, so to say, and give Silvio the option to start with the first question.
Yeah, thank you, Antoinette, and thank you, Robert, for your valuable insights. A question from an economics student considering the shift towards a well-being economy, or the possible shift towards a well-being economy. What changes do you foresee or advocate for in educational curricula to prepare young people for the new economic landscape?
I think one of the most important changes would be to take a much more systems perspective on education, to not be so siloed into the academic disciplines, because I think and to focus on problem solving, not just regurgitation of what's already known, but how do we apply what we do know to solving problems. So I think those two things I think would be the most appropriate. I was in Finland recently, and I know that they're at least K through 12 education, they've stopped requiring homework. They give students a lot more free time. I think they allow them to actually think and be creative. So I think that's part of what we need to do with education at all levels, to think of it more as a creative enterprise, not something that's just a way to learn a skill that you can apply to make money. Although that's certainly a side effect, but I think a much broader, more systems-oriented kind of approach would be better in my mind.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, and I will hand over the next question to Otti.
Thanks a lot. So firstly, talking about values, and I think what an incredibly insightful framework, Bob, that you've developed. I mean, this idea to bring environmental services, ecosystem services into economics, I thought was incredibly compelling. But reading through your essays and your books, I often had the impression that you were somehow avoiding the normative question. On the one hand, bringing nature into an economic framework, whilst there were many ecologists who were trying to position the biosphere and nature as a value in itself, and also by shortcutting a discussion about what future do we really want. And it's interesting you show these surveys, because very often in the surveys people are positive. When they have to pay for that future, they very quickly go away from their statements, right? So how do you take into account that many people might not share your values, which are behind your recommendations?
Yeah, well, I think that's where the deliberation and the discussion of these alternative futures needs to come in, because I think you might start with that assumption, but I think if you get people actually together and talk through the kind of world that they want, you come to a much broader consensus than you might at first expect. At least that's been my experience when you ask those kinds of questions. I think the whole idea of deliberative democracy in a real sense is something that we need to move towards as well in order to make progress, because we've fallen into this argument culture where everything is black and white. Which side are you on? That everything's a debate, and that's not really going to help us solve this problem and get to the kind of world that I think would be good for everyone. So that deliberation part, I think is going to be really important to overcome some of that polarization and differences in values. I think in the end, when you look at what contributes to people's well-being and the work in positive psychology and all of that, you find that people have a basic set of human needs, a basic set of values that there is broad consensus around. How those get implemented and how they get manipulated, in the political world, I think is part of the problem. Let's see. There's another part to this question. I think the whole
No,
issue
I think the challenge is between people valuing their liberty and freedom and having a different opinion, and the social choice problem of actually finding some common ground and then seeing how far does that common ground get us vis-a-vis the size of the problem and the speed of the change required, right? And I think, as you say, we need a very good democracy with people standing up for the common good, and that might not be where we are.
It's certainly not where we are right now, that's for sure. And it does seem to be getting worse. But I think if we want to solve this problem, I think we need to build those sort of deliberative opportunities. And certainly the experience that there has been with citizen assemblies and deliberative democracy kinds of approaches, you get some really interesting results, from very diverse people with very diverse values. And I think the advantage of doing the alternative futures is that in those alternative futures, you can specify what the trade-offs are. Not everything is possible. And when you ask people what do they want, right now in the world, they'll just give you a list of, everything that is not possible to have at the same time. So by creating a vision, a plausible vision of what the worlds could look like, with different trade-offs involved in them, then you can get people to think through, yes, okay, I would prefer a world where the trade-offs were handled in this way, and where there is enough personal freedom, but still, there's a concern for the environment, and everything, can be done in a certain way. So I think unless you can engage people in that deliberation and discussion of what kind of world they want, we're going to still be stuck and addicted to the world that we seem to be in, which is one that I think the majority of people these days don't seem to think is the right direction to be going.
And I think it's the more needed for the next question I wanted to ask you, and that's about the types of interventions you envisage, because they're quite far-reaching. So if I see it correctly, you have three main types. You have regulation and investments to ensure ecological limits. You talk about market shaping to change production and consumption, also very important, and measures to increase social justice and social capital. So it's quite a big bundle of interventions. Now, I was wondering how you balance them and what for you are the 2 or 3 most important interventions.
I think that's going to depend on the situation, So I mean, not everywhere in the world is the same. They're not at the same starting point, and so I think that's going to vary depending on the circumstances, and where the starting point is. Scandinavia, I think, is closer to where we need to be, and it's not going to be such a radical transformation, I think, in many of those countries. Who are already doing, some of the kinds of things that are being talked about.
Maybe because you're sitting in the UK as well, to have a concrete example.
Yeah, well, it's interesting that the UK just elected a new Labour government after 14 years of Conservatives, and I think people have recognized that that's not really what they want, and that they want better social services, they want better or lower inequality, they want the sort of range of things that we've been talking about. I'm not sure the Labour government's really going to act on all of those things sufficiently, because I think they are still enthralled to the GDP growth at all costs, kind of mentality. And if you listen to and read the manifesto, it's still growth. That's all they're gonna grow, and then that's going to solve all the problems. Because they don't see where the funding could come from. But I think there are other ways. Like I said, Scotland and Wales, which are part of the UK, have already joined this Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and so I think there are at least 2 parts of the UK that are a little further along in that process. England is lagging behind.
You also mentioned that experiments are important, so you have them in your own country. So
Yeah.
I would give the last question to Kees, because I'm mindful of your time, and I know that Kees has something to ask.
Yes. So I'm the activist of our bunch. So I'm always very interested in how can we change the system. And you already mentioned in your slides earlier the movement of movements, which sounds really fundamental to create that system change. And I was wondering, how do you see, how can we turn what is a cottage industry right now with, you know, all sorts of well-meant people doing their bit, to a serious contester of the GDP machine?
Yeah. I don't know. Do you have any ideas? I think in general we have to communicate this idea about alternative futures. You know, to get that idea out into the general public and make it you know, a vision. I think that's what has changed, has caused major changes in the past.
Yeah.
You know, Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech. You know, you have to have the dream, and that dream has to be shared by a large enough fraction of the population to really cause some political movement. So, you know, right now we have the SDGs. What fraction of the global population has even ever heard of the SDGs?
Yeah.
So, you know, but they are, I think, that vision, or at least the first step toward really articulating that broader vision. So I think we need a way to really get that idea out into the general public more broadly. I'm working now with some filmmakers and others, you know, to try to say, well, could we create a set of videos that describe these alternative futures and get those to go viral to the extent that a lot of people have seen them, and then they, you know, take surveys, and that those survey results get recommunicated back out into the policy community, and you get that cycle going, you know, where it becomes a meme.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a vision, and then it becomes a critical mass, and then, you know, and then things change.
Yeah, let
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and you can't predict exactly how that's going to happen, I don't think.
No,
You know,
no,
there's something will trigger it, and who knows, you know, who will be responsible, but hopefully something will happen like along those lines.
Here's hoping.
Yeah.
I think,
Hope is
Robert, we know you have to go now, and
Yes.
I will re-welcome everybody who's in the meantime joined us, and we will be very sad to see you disappear now, but you will come back. So, Robert, again, thank you so much for a wonderful presentation, which has really summarized a lot of what you have been writing and talking about in the last decades, which I think will be a super interesting resource for everybody who can access them on the website and the redistribution of the video that we will do. And best of luck in the spirit of what you just said for the good fight. At this point, as always, let me introduce the Transformation Laboratory and our meta-inquiry. And as you might remember by now, we always start with this chart, which is a pictorial representation of a typical economic system. So you have the government, finance, and the marketplace with different actors and components. And of course, nature, which is in the bottom left there, which is one of the aspects we will highlight today. And if we now take this framework and we start to look at what Robert is proposing, it's quite impressive. And it's one of the most kind of complete attempts to address all, if not all, then many of the crises that people believe are inherent in capitalism. And you can see, and Antoinette is going to go into the details of this, but you can see the concept of sustainable human well-being, SHW, and the genuine progress indicator, GPI, are the lead instruments at the top. You can see there on the top left, but you have a whole bunch of interventions that are in the hands of government. You have a lot of focus on nature, as already anticipated, with PES. We already mentioned payment for environment or ecosystem services. And you have a lot of things that are shaping the marketplace. And it's going to be interesting to see how the discussion evolves. But given that we are moving from regulation to market shaping and also to changes in property rights, we are allocating provisionally the paradigm with a left-wing social democrat ideology. And that is, of course, what brings me to ideologies. And let me explain some of the thinking behind that. You remember this chart, which is our overview of contemporary political ideologies. So conservative, libertarian, modern liberal or social democrat, communitarian, and socialism. Idealism is the starting point, and I'll focus a little bit less on that today. We already spoke once, and you might remember this chart, about the fact that in business schools, we only talk about neoclassical economics, the second column there, which is very often associated with a neoliberal stance. And Kees pointed out when he showed this chart in our very first session, built by Ha-Joon Chang, that there are many more economic schools, so schools of economics. So there's classical and Marxist and Austrian and Schumpeterian, Keynesian, and so. So there are a whole bunch of alternatives, but it so happens that in business schools or economic studies, we normally don't touch on them. But they're alive and kicking. And what I want to show today a little bit is how, at least conceptually, some of these economic schools link to political ideologies. And then I want to introduce the role of nature into these paradigms, and then see how it brings us to some of the alternatives to capitalism that we will investigate into as new approaches. So if you look at this chart, you will see the 5 most important political ideologies. And in the second row, you can see how I'm trying to associate them with specific economic schools. So conservatism goes with classical economics. So that's Ricardo and Adam Smith and Marx in terms of the labor theory of value. So these are or say, right? So some of the original thinkers focus on free markets, focus on competition, private property, but also combined with kind of traditional societal values. And of course, focus on capital accumulation, but also things like free trade and comparative advantage. If you go from there to the neoliberals, as I already said, that's very associated with neoclassical, but also the Austrian school. Austrian school is Hayek, or our friends from Chicago University, and Schumpeterian. Schumpeter, you will remember the creative destruction, which emphasizes entrepreneurialism and innovation, which arguably goes a little bit from neoliberal towards social democrat. So you have this notion of entrepreneurship also in the orange paradigm, so to speak. But I've allocated here very strongly with the neoclassical or the libertarian kind of idea of focus on entrepreneurship and individual kind of success. And here, of course, we get to concepts like utility maximization, the marginal analysis, equilibrium, and profit maximization. Right, so it's a model that emphasizes market, exchange, and consumption, as opposed to classical economics, which also puts a lot of emphasis on classes within the economy and on production. If we go from there to modern liberal or social democrats, I think we can associate schools like the Keynesian Keynes and the developmentalist schools, which all emphasize a greater role for the government. So focus on spending and boosting demand, state-led industrial policy and transformation, and a lot of focus on other economic objectives like full employment or stability, as opposed to simply growth or maximizing utility. And then from there we can go to communitarianism, and I think here one of the school that plays a role in that is institutional economics. So the emphasis on context. That is the relational context, of course, but it's also the institutional context that supports community building, laws, habits, norms, and takes a more inclusive approach to economic development, and also looks at waste, for example, in some of the theories that underpin institutional economics. And finally, we've got socialism, which of course goes to Marxist economics. So here is a very strong focus on classes, on the proletarians, so to speak, versus the capitalists, and a dialectic materialism, as it's called, in the evolution towards a classless society. Now, all of these paradigms have implicitly a view on human beings, but also on nature. And you can see on the left, in the classical paradigm, it's very much a resource. In neoliberalism, it's an input to production. and it's of course an object of property rights, but there is in market failures a view, so in regards to market failures, the view that there is a legitimacy to control externalities and pollution. And so there's a little bit of a consideration for nature in that regard. It gets stronger in social democracy, where we are really looking at strong regulation of externalities and also regeneration of or protection of nature as a stakeholder almost within society. Communitarianism sees nature more in regards to embeddedness. So it's integrative to an institutional analysis which looks at social context, but also the place, the natural context, but also the kind of the localism, as we have heard already from Helena last time. That's one of the approaches here. And in terms of socialism, it's again the focus of alienation and exploitation is very strongly emphasized there. So nature is almost like the worker, one of the exploited and alienated parties in the dynamics of the economy. Now, how does all of this translate? And maybe one thing that is worth kind of looking at in the interpretation of these different schools. There are differences in values when it comes to, for example, concepts like freedom or justice or care, right? Very evidently. And they translate into differences in the developmental paradigm. So let me just pick out the role of the state, as I already emphasized. On the left, the state has very little to say. On the right, the state is very, very important. And to the point that kind of the state is taken over by the workers in socialism, so to speak. Private property, again, very strongly emphasized on the left and becoming common property on the right. Individual rationality, so it's also very interesting. You have very rational, self-optimizing, self-sufficient individuals on the left, unencumbered selves in John Rawls's kind of philosophy. And you have much more embedded social rationals and also bounded rationality, the behavioralist school in the middle. So people who are not able to fully be fully rational, or shouldn't even be fully rational, and who might not even be fully individual because they're embedded in a social identity, so to speak. And the same goes for complexity. Very linear, very highly technical mathematical models on the left, and more complexity, uncertainty, ambiguity moving towards the right. And I'm not saying that one is better or the other, that you can combine, but you need to bear in mind that there's always a linkage between kind of the values that people have in their minds, the type of theories that they develop, and how they interpret them and how they steer them. And coming to the alternative or the kind of modern interpretations of some of these paradigms, taking into account nature, in the conservative column, you can see, for example, steady state economics, which for us is still very much embedded into this kind of higher GDP is better idea. The neoliberal ones, you have things like conscious capitalism. We talked about ECG, or techno-liberalism, techno-optimism. There is GDP growth is still the most important thing, but there's some decoupling through technology or a little bit of corporate social responsibility for the externalities, mostly voluntary. Then you go into the middle, right? And here, ecological economics is spanning a little bit both neoliberal, as we will see from Robert, but as we've seen from Robert, but it's also emphasizing state intervention, and well-being economics is doing the same. Hence, they're placed in the middle here, together with donut economics or circular economics, where GDP growth is a means to an end mostly, and there's a lot of strong regulation to bring it back into bounds of wider and broader societal goals. And on communitarian, as we already heard, with the Buddhist economics, Ubuntu, social and social solidarity economy, and these type of ideas, we are moving towards a very strong emphasis on the relational embedding of people in nature, but there's also, we're getting towards some kind of spiritual ideas where nature is a source of well-being for people. And there's this idea of local sufficiency or locality where we only use kind of, as we heard from Helena, globalization is the problem. So we only use markets when needed. And finally, on socialism, we will hear from degrowth economics that it's really about reducing or kind of building alternatives to capitalism, democratic control for resources, but also natural resources, and a better economy from a much wider spread of both the means of production and the outcomes of production. I hope this gives a little bit of an orientation in terms of starting to make some sense of, okay, we have a whole bunch of heterodox economic theories. We also need to allocate the role of nature somehow in this. And now we are listening to all these different proponents who go across these boxes to a degree, but we will find some anchors in terms of how they think and what type of methodologies they activate. And with that, I think from values, let's go to institutions. Antoinette, over to you.
Now, going to institutions, let's go through the same process. Let's first look at the different strategies to govern economy in a society, then look at how well-being economy suggests to do it, and then draw some insights. Our framework to analyze the suggested interventions of the presented alternative economic system is an institutional political one. This means, while economic activity or provisioning is often mediated through markets, these are enabled, regulated, crafted, and constructed in the political and public sphere. We distinguish various actors, very prominently, for instance, the state, and various policies, institutions, rules, which interact with the values we just discussed. Please have a look on our website if you want to understand more of our framework. Plus, learning from Robert Costanza, we have newly added ecosystem services to the economy and more directly place these as enablers of economic activity. Well, what then are the concrete institutions that well-being economics brings to the fore? First, we propose that well-being economics, through a wide bouquet of suggested policies, is mainly situated between what we have termed the mixed economy and the command economy. Second, the policies are based as far as possible on research to overcome the argument culture and are thus based strongly on evidence about ecological limits and on insights on well-being flourishing research aimed at enabling social justice. And last but not least, finally, on setting changing macroeconomic and market structures to enable the sustainable economy. Now, if we now look and go from left to right, then we see market failures are corrected for instance, by cap and auction systems. And the second one, the orange one, in the spirit of the mixed economy, the state incentivizes, redistributes, and regulates market participation and market rules. If I may pick some interesting policies here, investments in green technologies, tax advantages for benefit corporations, and taxing of luxury goods. Now, if we go to the red one, from a more command economy approach, the state changes property rights and seeks to curb excessive consumerism or other negative effects of current capitalism through targeted interventions. For instance, Costanza is arguing strongly for new property rights regimes, so both natural as well as social commons, which are to be governed by stakeholders. He also suggests to control the finance sector, actually quite strongly, and individual preferences are to be shaped by banning most advertising or by capping maximal wages. Finally, the green one, civic engagement and community, is also a very important topic. Now, with this slide, I just want to draw our attention to the fact again that well-being economics, in particular by Robert Costanza, is seeking to base policy measures on transparent and shared data. So you can see this here on the left side. The valuation of the ecosystem services should demonstrate this is the amount of value we forgo if we simply extract from nature for short-term profits. Now, if we look at the middle figure, then you can see also the dilemma we are in. Look at Brazil and the US, which currently hold a lot of ecosystem product within their territory. So the rainforest in Brazil, for instance, and in the US, national parks and a lot of empty nature space. And yet in both cases, it is very hard to sustain the ecosystem. Despite the existence of the Brazil Amazon Fund, for instance, where Norway put a lot of money in, when Bolsonaro came into power, the short-term profit of farming the rainforest was deemed more attractive. And in the case of the US, certainly Trump keeps on pronouncing that he is very willing to drill for oil in the national parks.
Well, thank you very much, Antoinette. Fantastic. With that, I would say let's go over to theory of change. Kees, over to you.
Thanks. So let's have a look at the theory of change and the practice of change of well-being economics and ecological economics. And to start with, I think that if we look at the theory of change, which is on the left side of this slide, we can see that Mr. Costanza's work is focused on the reforming of the macroeconomic governmental policy. So it's very much geared towards trying to change governmental policy making rather than directly production, consumption, or finance. So ecological economics and well-being economics research is mainly used as input for political change, for policy change, for reforming change. It doesn't preach revolution. It's much more a transition pathway based upon adaptation and organization and institutions that make up the economic system. And there is some market in there as well, and there is some bottom-up progressive community activities in there as well. But I think the main focus is clearly on the reforming and the reformist. If we then look at the practice of change, which is on the right side of this slide, the execution, then in my opinion, the overall position of Mr. Costanza and the field of well-being economics or ecological economics, we could pinpoint it as a technical advisor. And so it's very much geared towards how can we help other economists, other ecologists, and politicians to make their influence matter and impactful. And of course, there is difference in the various focus groups and in the various ways of influence. And so the way that Mr. Costanza and the well-being movement is trying to help other economists is very much on the basis of sharing their expertise and enable other economists as well to be consultants in the process of policy change. I think towards ecologists, it's much more a matter of enabling ecologists to be part of the policy making and governmental realm. And politicians, of course, the focus there is well, to help them, to give them information that enables them to change policy and to lobby for a well-being based or an ecologically based economic system. And one of the examples in which the well-being economic movement is doing it is via We All, which is a movement, an international movement. They all work together to emerge this new thinking, and one of the elements that the Well-being Economic Alliance has successfully introduced is the well-being economy governments, the We Go movement. Then it's clear to say that it has had an impact on governments, on policymakers. So, in my opinion, it's quite successful from a governmental focus, but I find it hard to say the same about business, consumer, and finance, because the focus is so much has been so much on policymakers. If we now continue and we look at the challenges ahead in respect to the change, so is the change that Costanza and the well-being economic movement and or ecological economics movement, is that going fast enough and far enough if you look at the reality we're in? And this basically is giving a bit of insight in reality. And this is actually about climate change, which is one of the crises, ecological crises that we are dealing with. And as you will know, the planet is heating up because of CO2, and as you can see on the right side of this slide, we have at this moment already lost the 1.50 degrees heating out of sight. It's gone. We won't be able to make it. And actually the same goes for 1.8 or 2.1 degrees. So what we are looking now as a realistic pathway for global warming, we are looking at 2.5 degrees heating or more. And although that might sound not too dramatic, the difference between 1.50 or 2.50 or 3.50 is only 1 degree or 2 degrees, and you might think, what's the difference? Well, the difference is actually enormous. It's almost incomprehensible. So we know that the damage and the cost that are happening with 1.5 degrees are quite serious, in the form of sea level rising, heat waves, droughts, floods, fires, and they will increase quite dramatically with 2.5, 3.5 degrees. So we will see an enormous increase in damages because of climate change. And the bad news is, if we go to the next slide, that we try to do something about this. And you might have heard of the term decoupling, and decoupling means that we know that we have to get CO2 down in order to also keep temperatures down, in order to keep the damage to a minimum. And the way we do this is by decoupling. So we are developing innovative technology that enables us to lower the ecological footprint and keep welfare up, to keep, to create room wherein the economy can still grow, but without the footprint. And we know that there is a very important difference between relative decoupling and absolute decoupling. So relative decoupling means that we are able to lower the impact of the ecological footprint in comparison with economic growth. And absolute decoupling means that there is economic growth without an economic footprint, and even in a decrease of footprint. And we know to keep the global heating to a minimum, we need absolute decoupling. We need to get CO2 out of the air. We have to get the percentages to a minimum. And the problem is that we are quite successful already with relative decoupling. The amount of successes wherein the decoupling became absolute, so where we actually saw a decrease of CO2 and global heating and economic growth, they are very very few. And to make it even more complex, we need an international absolute decoupling. So we need enable to get global warming down. We need not only one or two examples or one or two countries that are able to absolute decouple. No, we need the whole planet to decouple, because we have a global problem. Global warming is a global issue. And as you can see in the stat on the lower right, that is yet scientifically proven impossible. So until now, there is no reason to believe in the potential of absolute decoupling in a short notice. And short notice is really important, because time is not on our side. So if we continue to the next slide, you can see the issue is namely not only CO2, global warming. On the left-hand side, you can see the planetary boundaries, which were formulated by the Potsdam Institute or the Stockholm's Science Center for Resilience. Johan Rockström, a very famous scientist. And to put a long story short, these are the 9 boundaries, ecological boundaries, that we can't cross as humanity to risk our existence on this planet. So if we want to remain in a safe space as humanity, we have to take these 9 planetary boundaries as boundaries. We can't cross them. And the problem is that we know by now that we already crossed 6 out of those 9 planetary boundaries. So we tend to focus only on climate and on global warming and on CO2. But the ecological footprint problem is much bigger and much broader than only this. We also have a biodiversity problem. We have a freshwater problem. We have an oceanic problem. So this is quite serious. And on the right-hand side, you can see that it's not only ecological. We also have social issues. So a couple of weeks ago, there was a research that shared the current status of the Sustainable Development Goals. And to put a very long story short, we are well behind on the social development goals. So if we go to the next slide, this is just a very short summary of some headlines that I hope gives you a bit of insight of the seriousness that we are in. Climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, plastic, air pollution, water pollution, all these things are really disrupting the ecosystem that we are in, and they are disastrous, of course, also for our well-being. And then last but not least, I want to leave you with the slide that brings this all together. And that is something that we tend to forget. And that is that everything that is happening now ecologically has or will have huge impacts on our economy. And so if we go right back to the beginning, wherein I said that one of the profound fundamental aspects that Robert Costanza introduced in economics as an ecological economics was the fact that an economy is by definition embedded in the ecology, so that it's 100% depending on the way that we treat nature. Then we start to see now what effects are actually are happening in respect to this acknowledgement. So we know by now, this is serious scientific research, that in 2050 climate change will disrupt the worldwide economy with a 19% drop in global GDP. And just to give you a number, that is 38,000 billion US$ per year. And if we look at a research that has been done in the UK, where the focus was not on the cost effects of climate change, but on the loss of ecosystem services by degeneration and destruction of nature, we are looking at a 12% loss of GDP in the UK. And to put it in perspective, that is much higher than the 2008 housing crisis. It's double the debt crisis, and it is even bigger than the COVID crisis. And so, although well-being economics and ecological economics have had in my humble opinion, an already profound effect on policy making, and we know that it has entered governmental and political policy making. It has been taken serious. We can see that the that the problems that we are in, created by the ecological footprint, are very, very big and are rapidly worsening. So we need more speed and more scale to change the economic system if we really want to reform things before it is too late.
Wow, I mean, very, very, very depressing, as you said, Kees. Time is running out, and the consequences of not acting or not acting fast enough could be extremely, extremely problematic. Now, that brings me to the vote. As we anticipated, we now have investigated into 4 different paradigms. So these are your options. And allow me to be a little bit flippant in their presentation. I'm just going to run through them quickly again before we ask you to vote. So the first is economics, where you remember Alex Edmonds and his JP Morgan sweater, and he was suggesting that it's mostly about financial investors and shareholders becoming more conscious, changing their mindset, and through that influencing the way that our organizations are run, and capital gets allocated, and doing the things that provide some comparative advantage, not only for the company, but also for the social value creation. We can rely on markets to, so a little bit of invisible hand, helped by consciousness of the decision makers and corporate governance. We can hope that we will fix today's problems. And good news is not really much that any of us needs to contribute to this transition. From here, we go to happiness economics. I will take Robert's last. So happiness economics, Helena said, oh no, imagine Helena coming in from with the backdrop of the mountains. She's talking about the Himalayan region and her experience with these local people, or the indigenous people. This is not the right question even. We're in a wrong jungle. We need to get rid of globalization and go back to the roots. We need to find ourselves in these local communities which harbor and protect cultural values and the closeness to the place, to the nature, and also to the customs of the heritage of communities. And we should only use markets really when we need it, and in global markets only where we cannot produce things ourselves. So a big emphasis on sufficiency, which will naturally reduce our economic footprint, and people who are anchored in a place will take care of their environments naturally. And here we go to Christian Felber, who backdrop is the kind of red Vienna and a little bit of workers unite in the imagination. Christian is saying, no, this is certainly not enough. It's a question of doing the right thing, of duty towards the common good. And we need some rules, and the common good matrix is going to provide that framework that we need to apply both for the organizational activity and for the economic activity, the macroeconomic activity. So we need to install the common good matrix. We need to have ways to monitor that our investments, our production, our consumption are in accordance with that. And if not, then companies shouldn't survive, right? And kind of in his understanding, they will die because through the regulation and through the way that we have taken control of financial investments, they will just dry from not getting resources or from too high prices, because all the externalities will be included in the price. And so the not compliant organizations will over time disappear. And here comes well-being economics. We've put it into the orange box there. And Robert is saying, well, we need to go we need to forget about this culture of arguments and kind of diverse ideologies and so on. Let's go to science, because we have looked into a lot of this. Let's create a new paradigm that is focused on what we know, the studies of well-being, which are kind of a combination of objective parameters and subjective well-being, and we can construct something that we can all agree on in what it means to be well, right? So living in a good society. And then from there, we are going to regulate, and we're going to shape preferences in a different way. We get people activated to help us to bring this transition into their respective environments. And then by using things like the genuine progress indicator, we can construct a positive message, because all these other messages are rather negative. So apart from economics, but both for happiness economics and ECG, there are a lot of constraints coming. And Silvio asked whether he can still go on holiday, you remember, with Helena, right? So there's lots of things that we cannot do anymore. But for well-being economics, it's about the value we are basically letting on the table, right? So there's a big difference between GDP and GPI, and if we are cleverer, we can instead raise our well-being without having all these non-productive, non-economic activity going on. These are the four paradigms, right? So you kind of have the four colors, which was a little bit intentional here. And of course, there are lots of things that overlap, right? So the vote is for you to choose which one you believe is most effective. And I would like to increase the challenge here a little bit and go back to the forefathers of democracy, who suggested, like John Stuart Mill and John Locke, who said, you shouldn't be voting in your own self-interest. You should be voting kind of with the eyes of mankind. So as a judge, as a juror, right? So choose the paradigm which you think is most appropriate to fix the problems that we as a society are in, not just for your selfish kind of opinion or benefit. And secondly, I would also like to combine that with a call to action to say, if you like any of these paradigms, please, after this call, go and make an effort to learn something more about them. Go on their website. So for Wellbeing Economics, the We All Alliance, weall.org, I believe. So have a look at the websites, and maybe you can even join some of the events. So Robert has, I think, 13 local hubs. Maybe there's something in your vicinity. So you could actually start to get active, which I think is one of the objectives that we have with our journey here. So with that, I'll leave you to vote. And whilst you're voting, I'm going to hand over to Kees to tell us what is going to happen next.
I want to leave you with presenting our next guest, which is Hunter Lovins. And Hunter Lovins is author of, amongst other, a Finer Future, a wonderful book on regenerative economics. So if you are able, please join us on Tuesday, August 20th, where we will invite Hunter Lovins to be in our midst to discuss regenerative economics as a potential pathway to reinvent capitalism. Hope to see you there.
Wonderful. And again, a big thank you to Robert for having dedicated the time to us and the brilliant Q&A, and everybody who has joined us and invested an hour and 2 hours of the time in being with us on this journey. Please stay with us and help us to make capitalism and the world of business a little bit better day by day, learning together on this journey, and therefore hoping to see you again in a month's time here. Thank you very much, and take good care.